Couples therapists. Without breaking confidentiality, what are some relationships that instantly set off red flags? And do you try to get them to work out? One partner says they're seeking your services to help them determine if they want to stay together. The other partner says they're seeking your services to make it so that they stay together. Then it's about highlighting the points and allowing the person who is on the fence to decide what they want, since the other person knows. I saw a couple that was doing retaliatory cheating and telling each other about it. When they got through their anger, they decided to call a truce and made peace. With their level of emotional maturity, I doubt it lasted. I don't know if I helped them or prolonged their suffering. It was their decision to come to counseling, so I think it was the help they wanted. Other clients realize what they really want is divorce counseling. What's the best way to behave civilly and minimize damage to the kids while we go our separate ways? People who approach therapy with the idea that they must convince the therapist that they're right and their partner is wrong. Almost like they're complaining to a parent or boss to have them sort out the problems. Couples in a tit-for-tat argument. For example, I cheated so you can have one night to cheat with whomever. Or, I violated your trust and did drugs. You can go out and do whatever for one night. It erodes trust and compounds the hurt. 2. An affair that won't end. I've never seen a relationship bounce back where a partner is still in contact with their GF/BF. I don't mean an ex-GF/BF. I mean the person X is having an affair with, or is lying about it. 3. Control to an excessive amount. I most commonly see partners having to send pictures holding up a certain number of fingers, or proving that it's a live picture. This is abuse. 4. Overbearing parents and in-laws. I understand there's a ton of cultural nuance here, and I work with couples who have arranged marriages, as well as the South Asian community. However, when a spouse is more allied with their parents and calls them on speakerphone for fights, or often speaks ill of their partner to their parents, I usually see the couples stay very unhappily married for years. It's sad. If it's not abuse and a partner is willing to end an affair and genuinely work on it, I'll help support. I think couples therapy is sometimes helping couples have the courage to voice what they really want, and that may be separation. Relationship therapist here. One of the biggest red flags I see when working with a new couple is when they've totally forgotten the good. Part of a relationship therapy is reconnecting a couple with what they like about each other, what initially attracted them to each other, and what the positives are between them. When people come in and they've been so unhappy for so long that they can't remember what it was like to be in love or to even like each other, they're just about hopeless. You don't have to be happy for therapy to work, but if you can't even reminisce about the good times, then good times are probably over. When I see a couple in which one or both of the members are seeking to change something fundamentally about the other person, we process where the need for the change comes from, and the person with the issues evaluates whether it's a deal breaker for them or not. We work on acceptance and tolerance of others. I also recommend my couples are also in individual therapy on their own. Not my client, but I had to watch as my own roommate dealt with her fiance. He was A, controlling her physically, activities, financials. B, continuously dismissing her feelings/assessments/opinions. Fiance would revert to baby talk, speaking to roommate like she was an uneducated child. Daddy knows best type of gaslighting garbage. C, trying to hide his narcissistic tendencies behind his good church boy exterior. This was all happening in my condo while she was waiting to move out and marry him. I usually try to stay out of their issues, but one afternoon, I softly encouraged her, saying I agreed with her, to an argument I'd witnessed earlier in the day. She came back that night after the fiance convinced her that I was jealous and was trying to break them up so I could have him. She barely talked to me again until she moved out. Sadly, they did get married, have 2 kids, and she's a complete isolated stay-at-home mom. I don't even want to imagine what it's like for her at home. Someone else's response made me think of this one. When the partner raises objections to meeting with me individually, during the first session, I share that during assessments, I like to meet with them both and once each individually. Occasionally, I'll have partners who suddenly become very critical or suspicious about this, asking why'd I do that, and is that ethical? And the classic, I've never heard of a marriage counselor doing that before. It goes beyond curiosity, or simply inquiring about the practice. There is an incredulous and almost panicked tone to it. And sure enough, every single time, they turn out to be some variation of controlling, manipulative, abusive. I was in couples therapy, and at the end of the first session, the therapist asked us to say one nice thing about each other. I went first, said something nice about him. Therapist asked him to say something, and he replied, "My mother always told me, if you can't say something nice, say nothing. So I'll say nothing." Felt so sorry for the therapist. And yes, that's when I started planning my exit. I am now very happy in a new relationship, and my revenge is to be living my best life. Very happy now. Whataboutism. Instead of taking ownership and responsibility for their contribution to the degradation of the relationship, one or both parties simply point out an example of the other exhibiting a similar behavior. It's a red flag because it illustrates their lack of self-awareness and poor communication skills. Communication is key when trying to amend a tattered relationship, because without respectful communication, the conflict recovery process can never begin. In the conflict recovery model, both parties agree to the terms under which they will communicate. No yelling, no interrupting, no I told you so's, etc. Each party gets a chance to share how the other's actions make them feel. Then they each propose their solutions and identify where they made assumptions, or where they got triggered and why. Then they identify where they're willing to compromise. Next, we create an actionable plan with deadlines, and we monitor the progress to see if the proposed solutions were effective. In my opinion, everything can go to shit, but once communication stagnates, you're in real trouble. So even if you're arguing, you're still doing okay. You just need to work on how you're communicating. I'll just say that if you find yourself screaming, "I'm not fucking yelling at you," you might have a communication problem. Constant, needless escalation. When "I don't think we need this expensive thing" is escalated to "you don't really love me," major problem. It shows up quickly in therapy if you're watching for it. Mostly because the one using this to avoid accountability is almost guaranteed to play this card in relation to therapy itself. Either "I had to drag them here," or "they're just trying to break up with me." What they're doing is avoiding conversation about the issue by blowing it up into a bigger problem than it is, so they can make the other person respond to their feelings rather than dealing with their concerns. High conflict relationships. If frequent and bitter conflict began a few months or less after the relationship began and continued, relationship therapy is going to be a shit show. Won't be helpful. Either the conflict will continue indefinitely or come to an end. Not just my opinion. The research supports this. I'm not a couples therapist, but I recommended a couples therapist to a coworker for some premarital counseling. My partner and I had really enjoyed this premarital session from this super nice therapist, and when the girl from my work got engaged, she asked for his number. The day after the first session, I got a call from the girl saying, "I can't believe you sent me this horrible, invasive, rude counselor." I was in a panic. "Oh no, what happened?" She explained, "We went in there and sat down, and the first thing he asked was, 'So why do you want to get married?' How rude is that? How dare he?" That's when I realized that maybe the relationship wasn't going to pan out. They called off the wedding a few months later. When one person is entirely dependent on the other, especially at a relatively young age. I mean, financially and emotionally. These are typically young women, sometimes young men as well, who do not work out, do not have children, stay at home all day, and have no friends or hobbies outside of hanging out with their spouse. Very unhealthy and a huge red flag. Always ends up in a painful and messy breakup. Generally, we try to get them to find a friend, join a community, get a job or volunteer. Something to provide them self-worth and personal fulfillment outside of their spouse. My mom is a therapist, and she sometimes tells me a little bit about her cases. Nothing specific or identifying. She once came home really upset about a case and told me a little bit. Basically, this guy sent his wife in because she was having trouble with the baby. He came with her and interrupted her at basically every turn, and basically told my mom his wife was bipolar. In another session, the patient admitted she almost felt angry with the baby, and herself because she knew she would be a terrible mother. Her husband had been saying it since she got pregnant. My mom told me it became almost instantly clear that the husband was manipulative and abusive, and probably trying to stop her from connecting with the child. As soon as my mom suggested she was angry with her husband and not her baby, all of their future sessions were canceled. As a clinical psychologist, I focused mainly on behavioral medicine and cognitive assessments, but did my fair share of marriage/couples work. Refusal or inability to compromise is a ginormous red flag, one that I believe is empirically validated. Compromise is a significant predictor of satisfaction in relationship, and it plays an important role in the long-term success of marriages and relationships in general. I am an MFT, marriage and family therapist, and for me, an unofficial litmus test is when I ask at some point in the first few sessions how the couples met. If there is absolutely no positive effect from either person, no one even cracks a smile, or they just give me a single sentence answer, "We met at a party," that's usually a sign they've been so unhappy so long, or the conflict is so overwhelming that they can't access those good, warm, fuzzy feelings from the beginning. I partly wanted to do this job because I'm a romantic at heart and love hearing real love stories, and for the most part, hearing about their first few months together is an actually fun and illuminating part of therapy. Only a few times have I seen the flat or no affected couples, and it breaks my heart every time. I remember learning in grad school that most couples who come for therapy have lived unhappily for an average of 7 years before trying to get help. They come for that first session, and if they aren't cured, after that, most think that therapy doesn't work and don't come back. To anyone who may be considering individual or couple therapy as a result of this thread, go for it, and be prepared for it to take some time and energy from you and your therapist. I'm a therapist, newer to couples counseling, but one of the flags I've seen is one person digging their heels in and not accepting any feedback or suggestions. Then that person tells me and partner that they're trying. I called him out on it, said that he needed to evaluate what he's willing to do and not do. Needless to say, I didn't hear back from them. Another weird one is separating without a plan. All that's gonna do is teach you how to live without each other, in my opinion. I would ask them, "Okay, how do you know when the separation works?" "I don't know. When I start missing them, I guess," is what I typically hear. All these responses have made me feel so much more grateful for my younger sister, who pestered me until I was in tears of anger to leave my ex. Within a week, I could see how much better my life was without him. I'll never be able to tell her how much it means to me that she was ready for me to hate her, as long as it meant I was away from him. Good question. I doubt I have much to add that others haven't already said, but the biggest one I notice is respect. Respecting space, boundaries, feelings, interests, relationships are all so important, and lack of respect by either person for one another is going to mean big problems. I would definitely try to work them through it, but it's hard to point out to someone that something that they are doing is hurting the other, which leads to my second red flag: lack of communication. LOL. Obligatory, not a therapist, but my own experiences in therapy. My wife and I, separated now, went to couples counseling, where it was a husband-wife counseling team. I thought that would be great, since it helps us open up more, having a member of both sexes there. My wife was hesitant about couples counseling, but agreed to try it. We had our initial sessions together, and it was cold and difficult, as expected. And my wife said she still wanted to leave, but they convinced her to try a few more sessions to see if anything clicked, as we opened up. We had an individual session the next time, and I thought it went fantastically. I gained a completely different understanding of intimacy, not sexual, but emotional and relational. And I was jazzed to start working at putting it into practice. My wife came out with tear stains and sat in her car crying before she finally left for home. Our next appointment was another individual session. The male counselor and I were talking again, and he started digging into my expectations and desires in the relationship. What I loved about my wife, etc. He point blank asked me, "Do you feel wife is a good match for you in life, and that you want to continue this relationship?" And I was a little put off, but figured, yeah, it's possibly a good thing to establish that right off the bat. So I answered emphatically, yes. And he just looked heartbroken and so very sad. I knew pretty well right then and there, we were toast. Wife admitted her affair the day before our next session and left. Well, they used meth together on a regular basis. They continued to cheat on one another, fighting in front of their kids, cheating in front of their kids, and oh wait, meth in front of their kids. When doing couples work, your client is the relationship itself, not person A or B. So we try and work it out, and even knowing in your head There's no way in Fucksville will these toxic motherfuckers ever work this out. And believe me, I tried. I tried so hard. Until this happened that I will never forget and tell my students about all the time. Person B was like, why don't you tell him, me, about you sleeping with your boyfriend? Quick note, I'm black and will type this word out to illustrate the hurt this word can cause. At that point, I was just like, nah, fuck this. My desertion was finished. I had maybe a month left at this spot before leaving the state. I just told them that I was done today and advised them to seek another therapist at the front desk because I no longer was able to accommodate them. Told the boss and I was Gucci. Really, I just wanted to reach over and slap the absolute crap out of dude. Other instances where the typical one person wants to save their relationship while the other is halfway out the door. It's really depressing actually, because you feel for that individual and they are trying, but that other person has other plans. Many of the times, the other person was actively cheating and the spouses either knew or that person would tell me, low-key, after the session. I hated couples counseling. Y'all never came to me as a first step, only a last resort. Saying directly to each other, I don't love you, I am just here to try and like you enough to stay together. And the other person replying with, good, we can do that. Partners refusing to listen, absolutely deafening themselves to certain explicit statements, active physical abuse and each person admitting to it and trying to be okay with it, name calling in session, and when I intervene they both get mad at me, complete disrespect and true contempt with each other, yet refusing to accept the relationship is over. I could keep going. These are obvious red flags. Gottman's research does a good job of answering the opposite of this question. He studies what factor predicts a couple will stay together. He has like 90% accuracy. I was just talking about this case today. Years ago, when I was starting out, I had a female client come in and she reported anxiety, depression, etc. because her ex-husband was bothering her. I thought that was completely average and normal, so I asked her about it. She recounted many times that her and the ex clashed. I said, you know, you don't have to interact with him, and maybe just distancing yourself is the way to go. Then she told me they still lived together and had no plans of moving. The red flag indicated I was dealing with two crazy people. As long as there is no abuse and all parties still have feelings of love or regard for the other, just about any relationship can be salvageable. With the re-establishment, or in some cases, establishing for the first time, healthy communication patterns. Of course, all parties have to want to put in the work as well. I'm in marriage counseling, and the very first session restored hope in a relationship where divorce was threatened every fight. The moment hope was restored was when we both immediately owned our shit and said we just want to learn how to love each other again. The therapist was like, you both want to do better. You both want things to get better. We can work with this. I got the impression he had dealt with people who just want to be right, with an audience. So glad that wasn't us. The reason I'm responding is because he supported that thought saying, some couples are doomed because they just want an audience for their resentment, not help moving past it. Not me, but my dad was a pastor. He did premarital counseling. He had a couple who wanted him to marry them. During their premarital counseling, it came up that the guy was possessed by a demon that caused him to hit her sometimes. My dad met with her in private and explained that nothing supernatural was happening, that she was in an abusive relationship, that getting married would not get rid of his demon. He told her that their relationship now was while he was on his best behavior. It would only get worse after they were married. My dad refused to marry them and recommended he get therapy. As a therapist, it's not my place to try to get them to reunify. That takes their power and gives it to me, instead of teaching them skills to make their own informed decisions. That being said, whenever one half of the couple comes in and says they're there because their spouse made them come, it's pretty rare they decide to stay together. One of the big red flags I look for is meta conversation. Example to use for sake of discussion. Partner 1 is mad that partner 2 doesn't help out at home more. There are always two levels of communication. One is the direct message, intended, please clean up the dishes, and the second communication, about the communication. I expect you to do what I ask. When communication about the communication turns meta, the message gets muddled and a power struggle erupts from misunderstandings. Tone, body language, and the way one responds to the request all become a focal point. If the arguments don't fall into meta arguments, then that's a sign the couple has a strong foundation, and the work is usually about exploring expectations of the relationship or readjusting roles. If they fall into meta arguments, it's a sign the couple needs to build up their foundation, which will likely lead them to be able to adjust the roles themselves once that happens. Two different approaches, same base issue at hand. I hate to be that person, but what does it mean when your spouse fears you going places without them? I've recently lost all my mom weight from just being busy and stressed from having kids and whatnot. I'm finally hot again, and I'm enjoying it. My husband, who I thought would be thrilled, is not so much. He is definitely attracted to me, but he is also very insecure. Now he seems super vigilant about where I'm going and how long I'm gone for, or if I was alone. He literally won't let me go anywhere alone anymore. If I try to do so, he gets suspicious. Dude, I'm literally just getting groceries. Being unable or unwilling to compromise or concede points for the betterment of the relationship. For example, at some point in a long-standing argument where neither party is willing to concede, a compromise is needed. When it's the same person in the relationship always hell-bent on being right all the time, that's a red flag. Most couples understand the importance of compromise, so if there's a party who only thinks about themselves and how important it is for them to be right, that's a major issue. That either means the person isn't thinking about how this is also an important point for the other partner, or even worse, doesn't care. Being obsessed with being in the right and only being in the right versus listening to your partner's needs breeds frustration and a relationship power differential where one partner is just catering to the other. My father-in-law is a couples therapist. He tells me all the interesting couples when I visit. I low-key hope I can find a way to go back to school and do what he does. Like 20 years if I recall correctly. Story went on about him being an average guy and her being a train wreck. Drugs, abuse at a young age, etc. She gets clean and starts dating this older guy. A little weird, but the more I hear this story, I'm waiting for it to connect and make sense. The dude was her teacher in high school. We spoke a long while about that couple. Where you are in your life is a big deal. It's bigger than we make it. If someone wants to be a wild and free 20-something, you cannot expect them to be settled down, married with children, stay-at-home mom, just because you're 40. And that's okay. Therapist here. In my experience, strong, healthy relationships are built on two very important qualities: trust and respect. Love is not included in these qualities because love is not a determiner of a strong/healthy relationship. Dysfunctional relationships are still possible among people who love each other, and loving someone isn't the only reason to stay with a person. Many of the clients that I've worked with in the past who are in a very dysfunctional relationship have actually stayed solely because of love, but continue to struggle in those relationships because they lack trust and respect. Without respect and trust, most relationships are doomed to struggle or fail. For the couples that I've worked with, I always assess for whether or not trust and respect is present, and then build treatment goals around seeing if it is possible to develop those qualities. If they are not willing or able, then in most cases, those relationships are likely to end.